Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm so excited you're here. I'm so excited. Thank you so much, Lindsey, for being here and giving up your time to spend time with us today.
Thanks for having me. Great.
Yeah, I'm so excited. Guys, Lindsey is so awesome. Like, I didn't even know or realize how awesome she was until like recently when I checked out her LinkedIn profile. She's so humble. Like, you would never know by just talking to her how much she has accomplished in her short lifespan so far. She was a perpetual student for a long time, right, Lindsey?
Yes.
So she's studied a lot and she knows a lot, and she's, I feel like, such a great mix between science and well, I mean, kind of like we have this dichotomy, I feel like, in the cancer world, where there's the alternative and there's the conventional, and it's hard to bridge that gap, and there are few in that gap, but Lindsey is there. And so she has a scientific mind, but also an open mind to anything that will work. Doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's, something that has worked and helped people and hopefully can be repeatable. And so that's kind of where she comes in. She works with doctors and organizations to help them, if they have something good and useful, to present it in a way. And I hope I'm not taking too long and stealing your thunder, Lindsey, but taking it and presenting it in a way that's acceptable by the medical field, and also understandable to the cancer patient. She also works with medical students, grad students, PhD students, helping them share their information, develop themselves, and also help the cancer community through these translatable sheets of information about alternative medicine or complementary methods that can be used or presented to a person's doctor. And Lindsey has won a ton of awards. She's part of literally a dozen different organizations. I forget what you would call them exactly, or memberships. But yeah, and Lindsey has just such a sweet heart, a heart of gold, and very kind and compassionate. And I'm so grateful to know her, so grateful for you to get to know her a little bit right now. And so, yeah, welcome, Lindsey. Thank you so much again for being here.
Thank you. That's really kind. I appreciate that that introduction. So yeah, let's talk. Let's discuss fun things.
Yeah. So Lindsey, can you share with us how you got started into cancer research?
Yeah. So I think when I started thinking about cancer research was probably as an undergrad. I went to school at Lamar University in Beaumont, Texas. I have lived outside of Texas, just for those that may wonder, but I am born and raised in Texas. I'm still in the Houston area. And I was a pre-med concentrating in biology and music. And I had the opportunity to go to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital and work in the summer with a surgeon, which is what I thought maybe I would like to do with myself with pre-med. And that was really a pivotal time for me, because I realized I was working with the surgeon who would let me come in and observe, but then I would go back to his lab and bring some of the samples from some of the surgeries, and we would work on understanding how to really treat these patients. So I realized that a lot of what was done in the laboratory was dictating what was happening over in the surgical / treatment side, and that really intrigued me. So I was able to go back for another summer with the same surgeon. His name is Dr. Andrew Davidoff. He's still there, actually. So I just want to thank him for his mentorship. He is pivotal in my decision to pursue cancer biology research. So after that second summer, it just kind of made the decision for me. And then because of where I live, right, MD Anderson was definitely on my mind, and they had a graduate school, excellent graduate school. So I applied throughout the country, but ended up deciding to work with MD Anderson, and specifically started out looking at pediatric cancer because of where I had worked previously. But then I realized that I really had a love for genetics and cancer genetics, so that I ended up in a lab that focused on that. So that just goes to show you what you think sometimes that you'll start with ends up being something completely different. But that's, I think, where I started, you know, this process for sure back in college. So.
Wow, that's cool. And like for me, I didn't know what I was going to do when I went into college, but you know, somewhere along the line and afterwards, it's kind of formed its own trail. But
Yeah.
what about your, you know, personal connection to cancer? How did that play a role?
So, you know, definitely had, unfortunately, many friends and friends of friends that were dealing with cancer throughout my life. But a connection in my family was that my grandfather was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer a couple of years ago. And I was actually working in a position in the graduate school where I had graduated from at MD Anderson when he was diagnosed. He had been struggling for years undiagnosed, and by the point that he was able to get diagnosed, it had spread right from his lungs throughout his body, and he actually passed away within a month of that diagnosis. And during the time where I was helping my grandparents navigate all of the questions and things, I had the ability to really with his care team and ask some of the questions that you know, I knew needed to be asked, but also kind of translating between my grandparents, right, and the medical doctors. And I remember distinctly asking at the end of one of those conversations, "Granddaddy, do you have any questions?" And he said, he used to call me Sugar. Sugar, I don't even know what questions to ask. You ask them for me. And I thought that is why I got this PhD. That's why, beyond my grandfather, what I want to do, right, is to ask the questions that you don't even know to ask, right, if you don't have the background. So this has been something that, you know, over the years, and like you said, there's circuitous routes, right, that you go on, right, with your life. Things open up, opportunities open up, some doors close, right, where it's been a blessing to be able to start asking those questions and start asking cancer patients what they want to know, where they want resources, where the education is lacking, how to empower them if that's something that they so choose, right, to give them the ability to go in with these educated choices to have the conversations with their healthcare providers, right? And so that was something that was a hard blessing, right, I guess you would say, right? And has started all of this, and since then, working with friends, close friends, and going into appointments with them and their loved ones, and kind of whispering in their ear or writing on a piece of paper, like, this question, right? Having, you know, so that when you're in the moment, right, and all of the things that come along with that diagnosis, a lot of times you're not able to process or be able to advocate for yourself. So it's really, I think, an advocacy program, right? Like, to really work with someone to translate those things, to help you think of the things that you need to ask for you, to empower you, right, in that position, so that there's dignity in your care, right? There's choice. And that's something that's just really been on my heart, and that's what I've been working toward these last couple of years in the way that I work with clients and provide resources.
That's excellent. Yeah, especially for someone who doesn't have, you know, quote unquote caregiver or friend, someone who can be there and like help when your mind goes blank, or like think of other questions and
right.
you know, pick up your jaw off the floor. Yeah, so you can just like look down and be like, okay, this is what I need to read or say, like just read from the page kind of thing, right?
Yeah. And, just to temper that with compassion, right? That
Yeah.
there's still that empathy, right? For the situation, the emotional issues. Cause the physicians that I've dealt with that are excellent, the healthcare providers that I've dealt with, they still have the compassion and the empathy, but then they're also able, like you're saying, to come alongside and educate. So they temper that well. There's a balance, right? Because we're more than just our intellect. There's so much
Yeah.
to us, right? We're more than just our bodies and what's going on in our bodies. There's so much to us. There's so many elements. So I think, like keeping that in mind, having the relationship to be able to relationally impart that information. Right.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
So where is that information available for people, or how is it becoming available? Can you share that?
Yeah. So I have a couple of clients, and we can, if you want to reach out, we can talk about that individually. Due to the nature of my consulting work, I do a lot of non-disclosure agreements and things like that. But there are
Absolutely.
some things on the horizon that are really exciting. So one of the first things I did was develop for a client, we call it the research database. And basically, I'm taking all kinds of treatment articles, all kinds of scientific articles, book chapters, things of that nature about specific cancers, what have you, within the alternative, integrative, and conventional space, really critically assessing them for how they fall in terms of toxicity, safety, efficacy, what's been done, right? And giving them a rating based on that. So you can have a snapshot of like, has a lot been done? Where's the knowledge base? Do we know if this is helpful? If it's helpful, are there any side effects, right? All these kinds of things to give you that snapshot. And then also the ability to go through and just translate these things for you. So give you an overview in plain English, not in science-ese, right? Which we like as scientists, but it's not helpful to a lot of people, right? Because unless
Right.
you've, gone through a PhD, right, you can't
Yeah.
understand a lot of these things. So to make it accessible, so that's one thing I've worked on, as well as the ability to search clinical trials with your specific treatments that you've undergone, your age, specific diagnosis, so that you can see if there are potentials for you for treatment, so you can discuss that with your care provider. That's one thing that I've worked on that's really exciting. What I worked on that you've alluded to with students is a lot of the patient education materials. So videos, more summaries to take to your care provider to educate them on a particular area. So we're looking at lots of different alternative treatments as well as integrative. We do write for conventional, but there's more information out there, right, in that area. So we've really focused more on alternative and integrative treatments and said, okay, what's the body of knowledge? What do we know about these treatments? Put it in layman's terms, right, so you can understand, but then also put it in scientific terms so that a doctor looking at it can say, well, I don't know, are there any studies about it? Why, yes, I have this page and we can have this discussion. So those are some things that I've worked on, and we're continuously rolling out. Students really have done an excellent job working with me in that area. They love it. They love the ability to be able to work on something that will be a benefit, we hope, to cancer patients. So I just have to definitely give huge props to the students that have worked with me through MD Anderson, as well as I now have students from UC Irvine, and I've had students from Lamar University Honors Program that have worked with me recently. And I will just say, if you know of students at those levels that want to work on a project like this and you're on this call, the more the merrier. We jokingly say the army, right, of students that we're developing is we hope going to be something that we do a lot for cancer patients. And I would say, especially in this unique time that we find ourselves in, students are hungry for these kinds of opportunities. I do a lot of mentoring with them and working with them about helping them understand, just what it's like to work in this field, some things that I've learned along the way, but also helping them with their knowledge base in this area, and how to communicate effectively and work, for the greater good. So these are some things that we're working on. I also work with clinics because, as you mentioned, there is a definite need for a bridge, right, between what we laughingly call a lot of times, and I call myself this, so it's okay, the dark side, right? So the side where we talk about, that we have these standards, we have a specific way, right, of looking at the data. And because there are these conventions set in place, you have to realize from the alternate side, it's difficult to sometimes have conversations, right, about the research, because it's almost like people speaking in a different language to each other, and there's no interpreter. Again, that's kind of that common thread, right? We've talked about, right, with patients and care providers, but now it's like two sides of research, right? So one thing I've been really working on is building that bridge. So I have many colleagues, right, especially at MD Anderson, but in other areas as well, that are open to having conversations about collaborating and researching with institutions in an alternative medicine sphere. But we have to establish the language. We have to work on what are our goals. We have to be able to, have the kind of measurements in place and design in place so that we can then affect greater change within the medical community. And so that's kind of what I do, is work to put those people together. Many people think erroneously that there is not openness on my side, and that's not the case, right? There are fully funded departments that are working on very unique areas. I can think of a colleague right now that's working on mistletoe and cancer treatment. I can think of another colleague that's working in curcumin, and also I have colleagues working on benefits of yoga and meditation, right, and quality of life and outcomes in cancer. And these are people that are fully funded at MD Anderson Cancer Center, right? So it's out there, right? It's just that the connections have to be made, and that foundation, right, has to be laid. So really working with clinics right now, we've got an exciting project going on where we get to really design some things from the ground up, and exciting times for collaboration. So we've been really encouraged in that area. So that kind of gives you a bird's eye view of a lot of the projects that I work on, and kind of my unique perspective that I have in this sector. But it's been a lot of fun to really be able to put this type of knowledge out there and be able to utilize my training in this way. So
yeah, it's so exciting. And as you were speaking, twice I thought, like, well, actually there probably are, these connections, like you were saying, or people in the conventional space who are more open. It's just like my eyes haven't been opened yet. And like, I think that's like one of the reasons I'm so grateful to have met you, is that it's like, wow, like this whole new sphere is opening up, and it's coming to light. And it's just, I feel like it's a really exciting time to be alive.
Yeah,
as corny
it is,
as that sounds.
which is counter to a lot of what we hear right now, right?
Right.
And so I feel like it's about perspective, and it's also about education. And we know that knowledge is power, and sometimes there is just a lack of knowledge about, like you said, what are the opportunities in one side, what are the opportunities in another. And once we start talking, right, and having these conversations, we realize that a lot of our goals, a lot of our the motivation behind why we do what we do is exactly the same, right? And so then it's like, okay, well, where can we work together? Where can we find that commonality? And a lot of it is just I think just having the willingness to have those conversations, coming alongside and educating where there are, holes in knowledge from either side, right? And having respect, right, for what each side contributes, right? And so that's been really rewarding to see that there are people that are open to having the kind of conversations, even if we don't agree on every point, right, of care, every point of, what's being utilized. There are still areas where we can join forces and have a bigger impact, right? And that's the key, is that to be able to impact more, to be able to let others see the options, right, for care. We are not an island scientifically. You can't do a research project these days with a one-person team. I hate to break it to everyone, but I can just tell you, I probably had 10 plus individuals that I collaborated with just as a student, right? And this is exactly the way that it happens, right, within the clinical side as well. So we do ourselves a great disservice if we don't explore these options. And I think, those are just things that I'm learning and continuing to be educated on. Even though I have a couple of letters behind my name, it doesn't mean that I have arrived, right? You never arrive, right? There's always something that anyone at any educational level can teach you, right? And if you're not open and willing to receive that, that's a disservice to yourself and to the other person that has, something to impart to you, right? I learn every day, right? That's the thing I tell my students. I am a student along with you. Now, do I have more experience in one particular area? Absolutely, right? But I learned something from everyone, right? And so that's something that I think, these clinics that I work with that are open to this opportunity are seeing this, right? And it's a level of trust, right? We all know that, it's kind of who you know, and the connections are important. But once there's that, basis of understanding where you're coming from, respect just for what's being done, the compassion, the ability to work, tirelessly for the patients, that's a common ground that we can get on board with. So that's been super exciting for me, and I'm excited to see some of the opportunities that are starting to rise, and I'm looking forward to others, because it is exciting. I think I'm choosing the exciting time to be alive, because we're connected in ways that we weren't before, right? People are more open now, right, to these connections, that this unfortunate time has brought about these fortunate events, right? So
that's awesome. Unfortunate times bring about fortunate events. That's awesome. So and I'm like thinking we need to duplicate you, Lindsey.
That's where the students come in, right? I am, right, because training is pivotal, right? Training and opening minds to different perspectives, asking hard questions, pushing to think through different problems, right? So when I work with students, they love to hate the way I work with them, right? I am always asking them in a Socratic method to think about things by questioning. So when they ask me a question, I typically answer with one, because I know their knowledge base. I know that they can answer part of the question that will lead them down the path, right? And then, there are times where we get to a stalemate, and I'll say, okay, here's where you should check and report back, right? And they are very good about thinking about different perspectives and if they're pushed in that area, right? If they're encouraged in that area. There were some things that we worked on, I'm thinking specifically with some undergrad students, and they had never seen a particular perspective, right? And I introduced them that, and they said, this is really refreshing because no one has ever pushed us to think outside the box. And I said, well, welcome to the world, right? This is how we operate, right? In the real world, outside of academia, you're faced with lots of different ways of thinking, right? And you have to be able to navigate that with respect, but also a thirst for truth, right? And how do you understand, right? Different perspectives, so you can have a conversation that's helpful. So that, is something that I think about. And when you train people, right, to think, right, to go through logically how to assess a problem, to look at different perspectives, then you set up the next generation for these kinds of collaborations. You set them up to be open to different viewpoints, right? So I think, yes, that is my secret plan. That's not so secret now that I'm on Facebook Live, right? Is that the students, right, are the duplicates, right? They're the ones that's where I see there's so much hope, right? I see this next generation having these challenges and coming alongside and saying, let me take this challenge of this time that we live in and turn it on its head and make it into something positive, where I've learned these specific skills that I need to be able to be, well, just a better person in general, right? But to help in my area of study, right? So I think that's my hope, is that we're able to work with students given this opportunity, and then build more bridges, right? Because then they'll go out, right? And so it just multiplies, right? So.
That is so great. And that just like gets me so excited too about reaching, the students, because, reaching people who are older is a lot more difficult. Like, I've reached out to some old doctors of mine, and they're like kind of like, resistant to it. And I can understand why. Like, they've spent their whole lives in this one train of thought, and to think that they've worked with thousands of patients and not had all the best information that's available, that could be pretty shocking and a turn off. But getting people before they're kind of indoctrinated or trained in a certain way, it's really, really great, and an exciting opportunity. So I want to go now into like what process do you recommend people go through when they get a cancer diagnosis? Like thought, like, mindset wise, research wise, treatment wise.
I realize that not everyone has the mindset of, being a researcher, right? There's a particular personality type that kind of accompanies that, right? There's a particular, and that's fine, right? I think the world would be so dull without all the different personality types, right? So glad not everyone is a researcher. But that being said, it's different, right? If there's someone that has more of a research mindset, some people, for whatever reason, want to know every option, right? And some people, for their own mind and as well as emotional wellness, don't want to know every option. I can respect that, right? Yeah. Especially being in the position where sometimes it's difficult when right? Different outcomes, right? So I would say, really knowing, right, where you fall in that spectrum, taking a moment to let yourself process and have the emotions that come along with, as much as I could even begin to understand, right? I have not had that type of diagnosis, so I cannot, my understanding is just restricted as to what I've seen. But having a moment to try to process and say, okay, what is going to be healthy for me to know, and where are there family members or friends that can be my researchers, right? Like, that can help me if that's not a helpful space for me to be in, right? What's my team look like, right? What are the people that I know are going to be helpful to me in terms of not only what I'm going to be facing as far as the physical body, but mind, right? And spirit, right? All of these we know are definitely part of what you'll be walking through, whatever your treatment regimen. From the research side, I would say, just make sure you know the sources that you're consulting. And what I mean by that is that, if there is any question as to where particular viewpoints are coming from, don't be afraid to dig, to try to understand the background. Don't take things at face value, no matter what organization is putting them out, right? Because
Absolutely.
you owe it to yourself to understand where your information is coming from. And just because there's someone that you might like or trust in that area, still like search and make sure you're comfortable with the viewpoints based on really evidence, right? And not just on someone's reputation or some organization's reputation. Ask questions that are safe for you, right? So if you have questions about how this is going to affect you emotionally, or how this is going to affect you physically or spiritually, etc., mentally, ask those questions of your care provider. And if they aren't willing to have those discussions with you, then that is helpful to know that you might need to talk to others about that. I know, for instance, that there are some institutions that require the patients to be their own advocates when it comes to integrative care. They don't offer that as the first option. So just remember that if you don't advocate for yourself or feel like you can handle that, right, which is totally understandable with all you're going through, have an advocate on your team, right, as part of your inner circle of people that support you, that can help you with that. Because a lot of it is just, unfortunately, if you don't ask, then it's not offered, right? And so that's something that I would definitely encourage. Resources are out there. But, you know, it does, I've seen that it does require digging. And it's my hope that there'll be more, more institutions will start offering these packages, these resource packages where they give you, when you're coming for initial visits. But I definitely think that just thinking through who you are as a person, how this diagnosis is affecting you, right? And what, if there are areas where you need someone to come alongside, who's going to be the best person to do that for you? And what does your care team look like that's going to really help you where you are, right? And then just asking the questions, always asking questions. If questions are a problem, I always think to myself, then there's probably a problem with who I'm who I'm talking to, right? Like, so that's always a red flag for me. If my questions are not welcome, then maybe I would need to work with others, right, where my questions would be welcome, especially in the instance where this is your life, right? Like this is and this may be years of your life, right? And so if you can't, maybe you don't want to ask questions at the beginning, but at some point you will. And if you don't feel comfortable, or if you feel like someone's dictating to you care that you would rather have a discussion about, then that's an area where I would say find someone that will work with you, right? Just because there are letters behind someone's name does not make them an authority on every subject. Shock and awe. I mean, really, right? Like it doesn't. Right. And there are some of my colleagues that approach their patients in this way, right? That they are the authority on every subject.
Right.
I respectfully disagree, right? That's why they're experts in other areas, right? Because we can't know it all. Again, shock and awe. And so if there's not that openness, right, then that's something that I just always caution people about is, make sure you feel like the person you're working with would treat their mother the same way, or their father, or their family, their close family, the way they're treating you, right? That it's not just, okay, well, we think this therapy is great. Let's do it. This is what we typically do. Let's go ahead and do that. That's not enough, right? Just because it's been done before, everyone is completely different, right? And I could get off on the train of genetics, right? And where we know that that's true in so many areas where we're finding that to be true. We are so vastly different genetically, and the way we operate and our sensitivities, what have you, but we're also so vastly different in the way that our cancers operate genetically, right? And there are lots of things that we could go into there, but when you have someone that tries to standardize, right, the way they treat you, right, and doesn't look at options, right, for personalizing treatment, that's an issue. And I'm not talking about like conventionally, it's completely changed, right, in the way that people approach cancer treatment. It is very much personalized now in the way that there are approaches to treatment based on what we know. But there are still those that will say, okay, we're always going to do this particular treatment. Right. And that's in every space as well. That's an alternative, that's an integrative, that's in conventional. So, that's something, just be able to have an advocate in your corner, whether it's yourself or someone else that can ask these questions and ask questions that are uncomfortable for yourself and for others, right? Push the envelope to really understand, right? Because there are some times where we want to believe certain things and it colors our vision, right? And then when we dig and it's not the same as what we want it to be, we try to make it that way. And it's, push yourself to understand, right? To see things for what they are, right? Because that really helps you get a better picture of how to proceed, just from looking at how I've worked with patients, that's tends to be, part of the issue is just, first of all, understanding what questions to ask. Second, having certain fears that sometimes keep you from asking questions, right? And, then identifying people that are going to help you get around that fear, right? Navigate around that to be able to do what's best for you, whether that's your family, your friends, and your care team, I think, as a team itself.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome advice. And do you have anything else to share before we do Q&A? Because I'm sure people are going to have lots of questions for you.
I think that's pretty much it. Some of the things like we talked about that I'm working on. I think I did not mention one particular thing that's exciting to us is the ability to work with clinics on really drilling down what are the drivers and the kinds of cancer they're seeing and what their treatments are doing to the cancer at the molecular level. So that's something we call bioinformatics. So that's part of what we're looking at, is to really understand, a lot of times in the treatment space where the whole spectrum, we're talking alternative, integrative, conventional, it's hard for us to understand exactly what's going on, right, in a person's cancer. Let's just be honest, right? There's just so much unknown. Now we have the ability to really understand genetically what's going on in a person and their cancer particularly, and work with agents that work in that area. So that's something that we're really exploring with clinics, is the ability to take that information and specifically utilize therapies that are personalized, right, to patients, and specifically in integrative and alternative clinics. So that's been really exciting to have the opportunity to work in that area. And that's requiring a lot of collaborations and connections from both sides. And there's openness there that's really exciting. So that's one of the projects that I just wanted to also make sure that you're aware of, is that we are working to really understand, and also that gives the opportunity to share the work that's being done, the help that's being provided on the alternative and integrative side that has not been highlighted in this way before, right? And if you will, to give credence, right, to what's being done. because when we look at overall quality of life, we have a lot of indications. We even have remission rates and survival rates, but to really understand what's going on genetically so that you could also say, hey, someone else has this particular, same kind of mutation or this pathway that's being disrupted, and we've utilized that therapy, and now we see this change right in their cancer. That's not been done before in this space, and so that's something really exciting that we're working on. So just wanted to share that as well. Lots of fun things.
Yes, thank you so much. That is very exciting. Yeah, that's really great. I'm just like, thoughts are coming to mind that I would love to, share with you or others after. But yeah, now I'd love for us to do Q&A. So if you have a question, please unmute yourself. Leanne, do you have a question?
Yeah, actually, I do. Lindsay, you said something that brought a question to mind. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. You mentioned remission. I was wondering, you do conventional and you do alternative as well. Is that the same remission is in alternative as well as they say in conventional?
It depends on so when we say same, right, there's so many different cancers, so many stages of cancers, so many types of therapies out there. So when you see like research that's talking about trying to compare the two and their remission rates, survival rates, this is where those questions come in, right? I'm just going to say it's very difficult to compare. I'll just put that out there, because unless you start with a design study where you're saying in stage 4, ER positive breast cancer patients, either treated with an alternative regimen or treated with a conventional regimen, we followed and then looked at remission and survival rates, you're not going to have a good idea of comparing apples to apples, if that makes sense, right? You would have to design exactly those things. That's where those leading questions come in. So I know there are some studies, especially there's a particular study out of Australia a couple of years ago that really speaks to comparing survival rates between, right, the two sectors. And one of the things, just as a discussion question that I have brought forth in other conversations, is that there's not this drilling down of details to really understand, right, what kind of cancers are we comparing, right, properly between treatments, right, and regimens. So those kinds of studies may give us some information, but not the kind of information that is a study where we design specifically for that. So in answer to your question, we don't have a good solid picture, right, of comparison rates in that way, because we've never worked in collaboration in that way to understand, right, specifically apples to apples, right?
Right.
And so that's where these kinds of relationships are really important, right? To be able to say, okay, alongside in these studies, we're going to compare, right? And see what, it's also important to think 5-year, 10-year outcomes are, not just like, okay, we had 6-month remission, right? Because we see that, right, in a lot of different sectors. But what does it look like 5 years from now? What does it look like 10 years from now, right? And so it's a complicated area. So I'm not trying to skirt your question. It's just, being able to think of these key factors. So I would say for sure, that's one area that is on my radar that we work out. With the clinics that I'm working with, they do have survival data from some years, but there's holes in their data, meaning that this is where I get the opportunity to educate from my side and say, hey, we need to be collecting this so we can have a stronger data set and be able to design an experiment where we come alongside and compare, right? There's the other option too, where, and this is a wrinkle that's hard to understand, you have patients that come and do alternative treatment and they've already had a full spectrum of conventional treatment. So how do you make a very parallel comparison, because they've had so many different types of treatment, what worked, right? Right? Because timing doesn't always mean that is, so let me just kind of take this back a step. Sometimes when you have a treatment, it takes 6 months or so for you to see a development in a regression of disease. So if you take another overlapping treatment in that time, you don't know if it was the treatment that you had back here that worked, or this treatment that you've taken in overlapping time, if that makes sense, right? Yeah. So that's where there's another wrinkle. That's where this conversation gets really sticky. And that's where I encourage people to really like look at what's being compared. And if you can really make those one-to-one comparisons, right? And from what I've seen so far, unless you specifically set out with the design where you are taking these things into consideration, where, for instance, you know, I think about, okay, can we group those patients that have had these previous treatments before coming to an alternative clinic in groups, so that then we know we're comparing apples to apples when we're talking about remission rates, right? These are the kind of conversations that we're having now. So it's super complicated, which is unfortunate and fortunate, right? Because then you can say, on the unfortunate side, it's complicated. We have to figure all this out. On the fortunate side, we can say, all these treatments and this outcome, right? A positive outcome. There's something to this maybe when we go, you know, and look further in the genetics of the tumor and understand maybe what that is, right? So I'm a, as you've seen, glass half full kind of gal, right? It's just not helpful to be the other way. I've been that way before. So yeah, that's the way I choose to look at it. But you know, when people are coming to me just like you did and asking me like, hey, you know, like, what does this mean? It's more complicated than meets the eye. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Sure. Yeah. I hope it was helpful.
It was.
A lot, you know, sometimes there's like all these layers and it's like, oh, I don't, you know, want to add more layers to it. But I really appreciate these kinds of questions. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Sure. Awesome. All right. Well, I have a question, Lindsey, about Jane McClellan's work on the off-label drugs. Have you looked into that very much yet?
I have not in that particular area. It might be, if you'll give me some examples of particular ones, I may have come across them in all that I've been doing, but not that particular name is not ringing a bell.
Okay. Yeah. Her book is called How to Starve Cancer Without Starving Yourself. And yeah, there are drugs like statins, which block certain pathways in cancer that, you know, so she came up with this protocol for herself and then advocates, you know, a very similar protocol for other people. And it's a really popular, you know, way of thinking that people have right now, and an approach that a lot of people are taking. Like, you know, certain types of cancer thrive on, you know, certain types of fuel and things like that.
Yes. So I think I know I'm glad you gave me some more details, because I know what you're speaking of. So a lot of times what you'll see is like certain cancers that are known for particular upregulation of what we call vasculature. So really trying to lay down more blood vessels, right? You would want to stay away or maybe add certain medications that would either, counteract that process or keep you from having more, right, of that particular issue, right? And there are others like anti-inflammatories that, can be an issue depending on the type of cancer and their trademark, right? Like, so yes, I have seen some of that, but just not under that name. So I will look at that work for sure.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Are there resources or what are your recommended resources for people to go to when they want to look into all of the options? Because I know there's, especially, I know at least one person on here is, trying to figure that out right now.
Yeah. So, I would say I can definitely be someone that can connect different people. I would say that it depends really on your particular issue, right? Where you want to go. And that's, again, not to complicate, that just, I've realized that it's got to be so personal and what you're looking for specifically. So a lot of it is, just, understanding, what you're comfortable with, what you would like, right? And then, what resources to go for, right? And what areas to pursue. We're trying to work with a lot of my clients in kind of covering all these different issues. So I can definitely, as things are becoming available, if people want to reach out, I can share those. But I would say definitely working with someone like you, Bailey, or I'm more than willing to help in understanding what are the areas that you're specifically looking for, where's your comfort zone, and then we can provide resources in that area. As far as, I always default to looking at the research, but again, not everyone has my expertise.
Yeah.
So
right.
the tools that I'm developing, are going to be launching pretty soon. We're hoping at the end of October. So, hopefully then I'll be able to share more about that. So we're still in that development process, but that would be a great resource where we're coming and having more than just my set of eyes. So I want to make it clear that, as much as I work hard on being an unbiased source, I'm human and I can always look at things from my perspective. So really working on getting people that have similar training and also openness to thinking about different options and coming in behind me and seeing if we agree, right, in our expertise on these areas. So that's key. I would say if you want to start looking at sources and you don't want to, utilize talking with someone and you're just kind of going on your own, look at if there's more than one person that's sharing this viewpoint, right? For sure. Because with the correct expertise, right?
Right.
Because we can all learn so much, right, from each other, but then there's a point where when you're having to get down to the details of some of how these treatments work, having to get down to the details of, like we were talking about earlier, understanding the differences between studies, pathways, etc., you have to have some of this educational background, right? And so people that are able to go as a committee behind each other and look right at these resources and vet them, that gives me more confidence, right, in the background. So, and that's what we're doing on the side where I'm working. So it's definitely, it's a TBA when it's going to be out, but I can definitely point people in the right direction if they want to just talk about specific resources. Just kind of hard for me to say, okay, this specific resource if I don't know kind of your background, right, and what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Good point. That also brings up the multiplication of Lindsey's. And I was just thinking how maybe some of the medical students or graduate students might be able to help in that capacity also.
So they get really good at that searching and fact finding as well. That's one of the things that we train on. So for sure.
That's great. So how can people get in touch with you or reach you or find you?
Yeah. So my email is all one word, cancerresearchbridge@gmail. And it's a long email address, but that's what I'm trying to do, is be a bridge in cancer research. So it felt like it was easy for me to remember, but yeah, all one word, cancerresearchbridge@gmail.com. So you can reach out to me there, and I welcome conversations, discussions, and I'm all about sharing resources where I can. So, and making connections. That's what gets me up in the morning. So, yeah.
That's great. Yeah. And so we have people who pray on this call and who will watch the video. So how can we all be praying for you, Lindsey?
Yes, I just, I have a lot of projects that I've outlined, lots of things going on. I just want to do the best that I can for the patients and the academic community, that we would have students that would come that would want to learn and that would work well with us in the different projects that I'm working on, and that we would just be able to have some fantastic collaborations through this, where we can get some much needed information out there for patients that would really have an impact. That's just what I'm praying for, that the right people, right, would find each other, right, that would connect, and that we'd all be able to work on this together, and that the right projects would have priority. That's there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of different goals to consider, and a lot of decisions that are being made, and I want those to be decisions that will help others the most. So speaking of that, we've really thought about how to, and maybe that can be something we can pray for and also discuss, thought about how to interact with cancer patients and their families and ask them questions that we can then translate into like real-time resources for them, because I only have so much bandwidth as far as what I can kind of conceive would be a good resource for you. But if you're telling me, right, like there is the need for this resource, then I have the ability to go and make that resource available. So we've talked about some surveys and things of that nature. We've talked about social media and utilizing that, kind of like a votership on certain topics.
That's really cool.
But I'd love to have, prayer over that, but also weigh in, because really, our resources may be great, but if they're not in real time for the needs of the cancer patient community, then we're not doing the kind of service that we need to do, right? So I definitely just want to mention that, and I would love to hear, where we can really zero in that area. And I've even asked you about that, Bailey, before, but I just wanted to mention that here as well, and how we can, there are so many topics, so those things would be our priority, right? And that would really help us. So definitely prayers over that, and then just also would welcome weigh in on that as well. So.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Lindsey. This has been an awesome time hearing more about what you're doing, and just great to see you again as always. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Feel free to reach out to Lindsey at cancerresearchbridge@gmail.com. Share your perspective with her. What are your needs today, right now? And that would help her a lot. So
thank you so much. This has just been wonderful, and I am always so blessed to hang out with you, Bailey. And thank you all for your time and joining today. And please don't hesitate to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks so much. Take care, Bailey.
You too.
Bye.